Hi there, and welcome to episode 73 of Mad Knitting. My name is Susan. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and you can find me elsewhere online as madtownmama on Ravelry and madtown_mama on Instagram. Those are the two platforms at this time where I spend the most of my social media time. Too much time, to be honest, but that's the world we live in, you know? Today is December the 9th, 2024. It's Monday. I'm coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin, where I live and work. I haven't done a proper introduction for a little while, and I have a few new subscribers, so I think I'll do that just in case, you haven't watched the backlog of videos or don't follow me on Instagram or whatever. I am Madtown Mama because I live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is often nicknamed Madtown or Mad City. And I have two children. One of them is in college, one is still in high school. But that's obviously a huge part of my life. So I live here with my husband and daughter. Of course, my son's in college, so he technically lives here, but he's only home, now for breaks. I work for a nonprofit, and my job is basically 100% remote. So the downside is that I spend a lot of time home alone, kind of isolated. Big upside is that I have a lot of flexibility in my day. So if I have chunks of time between meetings and I'm not rushing to get things done, every few weeks I have time to film an episode. So it's December, we're in the upper Midwest. The hours of daylight are very, very short. The sun sets a little before 4:30 today. So I'm trying to get this in while I still have a little bit of natural light coming in. And I'm gonna try to get a run in before my next meeting, and that's just how it goes. Like I said, I work for a nonprofit, and because I don't do fundraising, thankfully, the end of the year is not quite as nuts for me as it is for a lot of other people that work in this sector. I do have kind of a big report I need to get done by the end of the year and some other stuff that's come up. So I wish things were a little more relaxed right now, but that's okay. That's just how it goes. What else should you know about me? I'm unapologetically progressive, so there are times when I talk about social issues or political topics. When I do that, I try to keep it short, and I always timestamp things. So if that is something you don't like or produces anxiety for you, you can always skip through. For today, I think I'm just going to skip all that because it is also anxiety producing and terrible right now that, I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm also a musician by profession. I did that for a long time. I actually went to graduate school and studied piano and taught and did all kinds of things. But I had a career change a few years ago. So now I do something completely different that's important to me, but pretty much unrelated to music. So anyway, I don't like to talk about my job a whole lot just because, I like to keep that part of my life separate from my personal life, even though that's difficult being a work from home person. So anyway, let's get into it. I started this channel a little over 3 years ago just to document my crafting life, talk about the things that I make. Finding community on the internet, I think is a good thing. So I've joined the throngs of people who have YouTube channels, and I talk about what I'm making. I have no desire to be an influencer or get sponsorships or turn this into a job. So what you see is just what I want to say, what I feel like talking about, the kind of stuff I'm making, what I'm reading, and all of that. Okay, now I'm just rambling. So what I have to show you today are a couple of finished objects that have already been sent off to a recipient, a few different works in progress. I don't know why I can't say that. And I did want to share a little bit of what I've been reading. So before we get to the finished objects, I'll tell you what I'm wearing. This is a shawl I made a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, I don't remember. But the design is Locatelli, and it's called Some Me Time, which is like a reference to self-care, I guess. and it's triangle shaped. I don't want to take it off because it's keeping me warm. And there's this really pretty feather and fan pattern. Her pattern only calls for one color, but I was using for this main part some Polwarth yarn that I got at the Wisconsin Sheep and Wool Festival. It's gorgeous. It was so nice to knit with, but I had like one skein of it and it was not enough for the entire shawl. So I striped in for the feather and fan, which is divided by these garter ridges. I used Ewetopia Fibermill ridge fingering in these two different colors. And this is really cool. The way they made these colors, they're called warm and cool, because they took all the leftover bits of fiber from making their other yarn and put all the warm tones together in like one pile and all the cooler tones together in another pile and spun those up. And so that's how you, like, all mixed up, what you get is this very warm, rusty brown color, and then this sort of muted dark teal color. And I really like this. Is probably my favorite shawl that I've made, and I think it's because the yarn is so nice and because it's the perfect size. It's big enough that I can actually wrap it around my neck, but it is not so big that these things don't get in my way too much. So big win there. Okay, like I said before, the first finished object I have, it's two things actually that are not with me because I have already sent them off to the recipient. So I'm going to insert a video clip here talking about them. Hi, this is Susan from the past. It is Monday, December 2nd, and I am just recording a quick, short segment to share a couple of things that I made as a gift that I need to send off. So you will see this at some point in the future from now. I am in my basement because my high schooler is still asleep. She doesn't have school today and I don't want to bother her. So here I am. By the way, I am wearing the Seelbach pullover. This is a pattern by Thea Colman, and I made it as a test knit in 2019, although I was way behind finishing it, way behind the deadline. I was in school. I probably shouldn't have signed up, but anyway, it's now one of my favorite sweaters. I used Barrett Wool Company, Wisconsin Woolen Spun worsted, and it has held up beautifully. I wear this a lot. It has barely showed anywhere. Beautiful cable pattern, great pattern, drop shoulder design, and even so, I like it. So anyway, so what I'm showing you is a hat and mitt set that I made for someone, and I really need to send them now. So I'll start with the mitts because that's what I made first. Again, these are both Thea Colman patterns. She's also known as Baby Cocktails, pretty well-known designer. The mitts I made are called Blue Wave, and they're very cool. She designed these to support Democratic candidates. We all know how that's been going. Anyway, it's this really cool cabled pattern up the back of the hand. I had to make a couple of modifications, which I'll tell you about first. First of all, I did the left mitt first, and there was something funky in the instructions with the thumb increases. It was like the way the pattern was written for the left mitt, it was like you were doing one of the increases, along the side of the gusset and one kind of in the middle, which didn't seem right. So I had to rip it out and do that part over. Wasn't hard to fix, but something wasn't right. And I did not see that issue on the right mitt. So I think it must have just been an error in the pattern. I also had to add one set of increases because it felt like the circumference around the thumb was going to be too small, although the hand circumference was just fine. So maybe my gauge was different than hers, or maybe her thumbs are super skinny. I don't know. that wasn't a hard thing to do, but I did end up with more increases and thus a deeper gusset, and I think these fit really nicely. The other modification I did was to add extra length at the top for ribbing because I wanted it to fold. I wanted it to fold down and also have the opportunity to unfold the ribbing and cover the fingers a little more thoroughly, because these are going to somebody who lives in the upper Midwest, which can get very cold in the winter, and I wanted extra warmth for the mitts. So I would give this pattern like 3.5 out of 5 stars because of the issues with the thumb gusset, but it's a very cool pattern and otherwise very well written. Cable chart's easy to follow, all that kind of stuff. To go with it, I made a hat. This is also by Thea Colman. The pattern is called Nightcaps. And there are 2 versions in one pattern, 2 versions of the cable. So I chose one where the cable kind of goes all the way up. There is a second version of it where there's a little more going on kind of near the bottom, and I will find pictures and insert them somewhere here so you can see. And again, I had a little bit of an issue with the pattern just because I think her gauge was quite a bit different than mine. She does call for like a DK or light worsted weight yarn, but in the pattern, I mean, there's like 4 or 5 different size hats, which is great because you can just pick a cast on number that works best for you. But her gauge called for something like 30 stitches over 4 inches in 2x2 rib, which I was just not getting. Like my gauge was just not that tight. So I cast on originally whatever the number was for the size I was making, and I could tell that this hat was going to be massive. So I ripped it out, went down, I think I went down a needle size from a 7 to a 6, and cast on the number of stitches that I thought would probably work better. And sure enough, it was great. I have a better photo of me wearing it. It's not super snug, but I think it fits really well, and it all worked out. But just a caution, if you decide to make the nightcap pattern, just check your gauge, check the cast on, and maybe do what feels right. Now, the pattern, I use superwash yarn for this, and the pattern calls for non-superwash yarn, so there might be some difference there in how much that ribbing pulls in for the different yarn she used. I don't know. The yarn I used, by the way, is Periwinkle Sheep Merino DK. It comes in 100 gram hanks. I think it's about 200 yards or 220 yards, I can't remember, per hank. So it's kind of a heavier DK, light worsted. This is yarn I bought from what is now Modern Daily Knitting. It wasn't even called that back then. They don't carry this yarn anymore, and this was a special colorway, I think called Pine Forest or something. I really, really like it though. And I had 2 skeins, so I used 1 skein for the hat and 1 skein for the mitts, and I've got plenty left for a small hat or something, or an accent color on something. So yeah, so that's the project. I might sew a pom-pom onto the hat. I thought that would look nice. This is from Barrett Wool Company, and they have the kind of pom-poms that have the little snap. So you just sew the bottom part of the snap onto the hat, and then you can remove the pom-pom for cleaning, or if you don't like it or want to change the color or something. So I think I will add that before I send it off. Last thing, I'm trying to reduce paper waste. It's the holiday season. We tend to go through a lot of wrapping paper and tissue paper, and even if you reuse, it still feels kind of wasteful, because I believe tissue paper is not recyclable. There's probably plastic in it. So I had this fabric from long ago, and I sewed up a square. This is the size that would be appropriate for a napkin, like a table napkin. So if the recipient wants to use it as a napkin, they can do so. If they don't want to, or if they don't like it, they can always reuse it as a wrap. But what I cut out was 18 inches square, And then folded, double folded the edges and did something kind of fancy with the corners. Not exactly mitered, but anyway, so it's all very neat looking. But if they don't want to use it as a napkin, they can always just wrap gifts in it, which is what I am doing to send this package. So that is what I have to share today. Back to the regular episode. Now, the lighting in that 8 minutes or so clip was not good because I was in my basement and I had to turn on the light. But I do have pictures that should have been inserted of me wearing the hat and mitts, so you get a better idea of what those look like. But I thought I would just show you the yarn I have left over and talk about it for a bit, because I know that at least one commenter has asked me to talk more about like the yarn I'm using and specifically what I like about it, or don't like, I guess. So this is that Periwinkle Sheep Merino DK. I think the color was called Pine Forest. And this is, this is really beautiful, beautiful green color. Right in my wheelhouse. It is a superwash yarn. So if you watched my last episode, you would have seen that I started a colorwork hat using this with a gray, and the contrast just wasn't enough for me to finish the hat. So I ripped it out and did the other thing instead. But I have some thoughts on this yarn. It is really nice. I made a sweater for myself. I've made at least one sweater for one of my nieces that she has long since grown out of. I have made a hat, another pair of mitts. This is the yarn that just keeps on giving, y'all. And I have the sweater I made for myself, I have worn several times. And despite the fact that this is superwash merino yarn, it has not pilled. It still looks really good. It doesn't look too worn. It has not stretched out. In fact, the sleeves right up a little bit, which kind of annoys me, but I can live with it. So as superwash yarns go, I think this is a really good one. I'm pretty sure the Periwinkle Sheep still sells this yarn base, not in this color anymore. So, if you ever wanted to check it out, I recommend it as a good superwash option. But it's, it's nice and round. It's got good stitch definition. I love how the cables looked in this yarn. It even works okay for color work. I've done that before, like in the sweater for my niece. I don't like doing color work in superwash, but sometimes the occasion just calls for it, and that's what you do. So anyway. Okay, on to works in progress. I had hoped something more would be finished by today, but I just have too many things going, too many balls in the air to have finished anything. So where shall we start? Let's start with socks. Let's get the socks out of the way. Because y'all, I always have a lot of socks going. And it gets a little repetitive because I don't do that much that's like original or interesting with socks. So we'll start with that. First, the Kamalanomenon socks. I haven't made a lot of progress on these, but I've made a little bit since my last episode, so I'm showing them for posterity's sake. Kamalanomenon is the name of the colorway of this yarn. This is Wisco sock from Ewetopia. Same supplier that made the colors in this shawl. So they have yarn that they mill, and then they also have commercial bases that they hand dye. And this is one of those. Wisco sock is 80% superwash wool, 20% nylon. It is really, really nice. I made a pair of socks for my daughter out of a different colorway, and I've noticed her wearing them a lot, and they have held up pretty well. And the dye has held up pretty well too. So I would absolutely recommend this for socks. This is a special colorway made in honor of Kamala Harris. Pour one out for that campaign, y'all. That was a heck of a campaign. Even if they lost, it was a heck of a campaign. Anyway, so I am using size 1 needles. I cast on 66 stitches. Most of this is done in garter rib, like 1x1 garter rib. The column of knit stitches continues down the heel in those slip stitches, which I'm sure I showed you last time. And I have a recipient in mind for these, like I said, but their birthday isn't until like later, like after the new year. So I'm not in a huge hurry to finish these, but it's a good autopilot project to take with me. I have a pair of tweed socks I haven't touched since my last episode, so I'm not going to show you those. But I did start a new sock yesterday, and this is just too fun. So, the Madison Symphony does this huge Christmas concert every December. It's sold out. Every performance sold out. They have 3 of them over the weekend. And my daughter is in Madison Youth Choir, in the high school choir, and they sing every year for this concert. It's huge. They have the symphony orchestra, the symphony chorus, they have Madison Youth Choirs, they have Mount Zion Gospel Choir, who are amazing. They always bring in soloists. It's super cheesy, but it's also really good musicians performing, so it's a good time. And here's another thing, they always do the Hallelujah chorus from Handel's Messiah right before intermission. It's always the last piece in the first act. And I always sing it at my full volume because I know that piece by heart, the soprano part, and I don't care if nobody else around me is singing. They invite the audience to participate if they know it. So it was kind of funny, the conductor mentioned that this has been an issue in the movie Wicked, where people are singing along with the songs even if they don't know them very well or aren't necessarily singing on pitch. And so theaters have had this problem where like people are being really disruptive to the movie because they probably shouldn't be singing along. Anyway, don't sing the Hallelujah chorus unless you know it, but if you know it, go ahead. Anyway, I always bring knitting because it's like a 2.5 hour show, and even if the music is really good, I get pretty fidgety. So I decided that I wanted to start a festive pair of holiday socks while I was sitting there when I was not singing. Haha. And here it is. I don't know how well you can see. It's probably picking up some. This is a new to me yarn. I hadn't tried this before. It's West Yorkshire Spinners. And what is this base called? I actually have the label. It's called Sparkle, Signature Sparkle 4-ply. 75% wool, 35% of that is blue face luster. It has added sparkle, obviously. And this is the color Vintage Tinsel. So I thought for a holiday concert, in a season with so much uncertainty ahead of us, I wanted to knit something really cheerful. So I have cast on a pair of sparkly holiday socks. This is self-striping yarn, and it's got like pine green, purple, sort of a vintage looking red and a vintage looking blue. And I thought that this might be a little rough because one thing I know about this yarn is that it tends to be very hard wearing. Like this is a really good workhorse sock yarn, which I'm a fan of. But there's so much sparkle in here. And because it's not like your softy soft sock yarn, I was afraid it might be kind of rough to knit with, but it's not at all. It's been very, very pleasant. So it's self-striping yarn. I cast on 66 stitches. I'm gonna give these away. I already know who they're for, and I'll probably do a short row heel because that's what I like to do for self-striping yarn, but stay tuned. So those are my 2 sock projects. What do I have else? Okay. My last episode, I think I had just barely started this cardigan for my niece. These are Christmas presents. I have now made really good progress on 2 cardigans. So I'll show you those. Here's the one that I had started. I mean, I think I had like this much done last time, and I got a ton of work done over the Thanksgiving holiday. which was like 2 weeks ago almost. So this is the one for the older niece. The pattern is Classic Cardigan by Tin Can Knits. Tin Can Knits is such a reliable source of patterns. They've been doing this for a long time. They've been designing for, you know, all ages and body size and genders for a long time. They're just solid design team. So when they released their basics collection, whenever that was, a couple years ago, I bought the whole thing, even though I probably don't really need a pattern for hats and socks, which is part of it. But this way I knew that I would have reliable numbers and just, just good patterns for basic stuff. So this is the size 8 to 10. My niece is 8, but she'll be 9 in the spring, so closer to her 9th birthday than her 8th birthday. So this is the size 8 to 10. I had my brother help pick out the colors. So I'm using Knitpicks Swish DK. That's 100% superwash yarn. And when they had their big sale in November, I sent the Swish page, like website, to my brother and said, tell me what colors your daughters would like. And he picked this one out for the older one. So I have a few inches to go on the body, but I want to add pockets to the front. And I think I'm at the point where I need to do a little kajiggering for that, which I have already done on the second one for the younger niece, whose favorite colors are like whatever variety of bright pink you can find. So I picked the brightest pink available, which is called Crush. So this is the next size down. This is the size 6 to 8. She's about 6.5. And she's actually fairly small for her age, so she may need to grow into this, but that's okay. Yeah. So same thing. It's top down, raglan. You know, pretty boilerplate design. One thing I will comment on is that you cast on for like the back and the sleeves and like one stitch on either, or no, like you cast on all the stitches, right? But then you do short rows for shaping, which is one way to handle neck shaping in a raglan. So you kind of have to keep track of your short rows. I screwed up and had to start over the first sweater, in fact, because I did something wrong. I don't even know what. So this is what those short rows look like. I think they look pretty good. I do the kind with a double stitch where you just turn your work and yank the stitch upside down, because I think that works really well. Another way to handle neck shaping on a raglan is to just cast on fewer stitches for the front than you need eventually, than you need in total. And as you're working back and forth with the increases for the sleeves and the back, you're adding more stitches to the front by increasing. And eventually when you get to the point where you just need the very front of the neck that won't dip down anymore, you just cast on stitches at the end of your row. Which in some ways I like a little better. I feel like it's a little less fussy, but the trend these days seems to be to do short rows for all shaping no matter what. So, I'm following instructions and I think it's fine. Let me show you how I did the pockets. So when I got to about 3 inches before it was time to start the bottom edging, I put some stitches on a holder, held it to the back of the work, cast on the same number of stitches to go in the front. I had markers separating, or markers showing where that pocket was. So between the markers for a few rows, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 garter ridges, I just did garter stitch. So I was knitting on both sides of the work until it looked like I had enough of a pocket brim. Is that what you would call it? And then I just did stockinette. When I got to where it was time to start the bottom edge, I halted my knitting on the main part of the sweater, put those stitches from a holder onto another set of needles, and just knit down the inside, the pocket lining, the same number of rows that I had done on the front. So I'm gonna have to sew down the sides on the inside. But when I got to the bottom, I just went back to the main part of the, went back to the needles holding the stitches for the main body of the sweater. And as I went across, I was knitting both the outside and the inside pocket stitches together. So the bottom is already taken care of. So I just need to sew down the sides, which are curling because they're stockinette stitch, but once they're sewed down, that's not going to matter. So that's how I did the pockets. I didn't see instructions for pockets, but I mean, it was pretty easy to figure out. So I will do the same thing on the teal cardigan. Also the instructions, the only other modification I made is that the instructions tell you to do ribbing. I just like the look of a garter edge a lot of times, especially since this is a plain color cardigan. So the pockets add a little bit of interest. I will have some contrasting buttons that will add some interest, but I think the texture of a garter stitch edge is very pleasing. I have bound off the bottom, but I've got that last stitch still on this needle because I'm gonna use that same yarn, which is getting tangled because I keep picking this thing up, to pick up stitches to do the button band up the front. So I still have sleeves, button bands to go on this, and neckband. A little more to do on the teal one, but it's really, they're coming along pretty quick. And for a lot of that sweater knitting, it's really autopilot, like, especially when you get to the main body, it's just stockinette back and forth. So it's perfect for meetings and, kind of when I need to check my brain out. Okay, my last work in progress is a very practical thing for my son. He was here for Thanksgiving. It was his first visit home from college, and that was wonderful to see him. And we had a cold snap that weekend. It was really quite chilly. No, it was not chilly. It was cold. Was it our first cold snap? I don't know if it was our very first one, but where we live, we can get some very cold weather and it will stay cold for a long time. But it seems like in that late fall period, around the time that the cold weather just settles in for real at first, when you're not quite adjusted to it, it can be pretty miserable. So he had brought a pair of mittens that I made him that were not really doing the job keeping his hands warm. They weren't, the wind was cutting through, they weren't sort of dense and thick enough. So I've decided to make him a new pair for Christmas. And he goes to school in Minnesota, so where he is even farther north, ostensibly colder and snowier than here. So I really wanted to make a pair that would really help solve that problem for him. So I am making the Midlothian mittens. This is a pattern by Chau, who is just a fantastic designer. And I understand she's a really good tech editor too. Yeah. So I don't know if she still does that, but I know historically she's been a tech editor. Her business name is Cosmic Pluto. I bought this pattern ages ago, and I actually made half a pair of mittens for myself and just haven't done the lining. 6 or 7 years ago. It's been a while. And it's a real shame because I had some mental block and didn't do the lining, but I'm gonna have to get over that for these because I really want to give these to my son for Christmas. Maybe I'll grab those to show you after I'm done showing you what I'm making for him. So I got this done in 2 days. I highly recommend this pattern. It's very clearly written. It's got 4 different sizes. So if your gauge doesn't totally match, you can probably find a size, unless you're way outside the scope of it, you can probably find a size that works for you. The color work is very straightforward. It's a 6 round repeat. Yeah, both mittens are the same, so this could be the left or the right mitten. So you make them both the same. It's really good and really clear. So I am making him the 3rd size because the 4th size just looked enormous. And it's really big on me. Like on me, this practically looks like an oven mitt. But that's on purpose because his hands are bigger and there's the lining. So you need to account for the extra room for that. Yeah. What shall I say about this? I don't want to give away any secret sauce, but her method for the provisional cast on is actually rather ingenious. I've never seen it done that way before. And so that was cool. You only need waste yarn to hold the extra stitches. I added one extra pattern repeat on the cuff because I thought they were looking a little short. Once I got past the thumb and saw just how long these were, now I'm thinking I didn't need to add that extra repeat. But again, that just means they'll be that much warmer. So that's good. So the first mitten outer layer is completely done. Before I do the lining, I've gone ahead and started the second one. So I'm about ready to start the thumb gusset here. And before I talk about the yarn, I just want to say I've knit a lot of mittens, not as many mittens as socks, but I've been through a lot of mitten patterns. And I have to say that I'm a little more particular than I used to be. I will no longer, maybe you should never say never. I am less inclined to knit a mitten that just has like afterthought waste yarn thumbs. I feel like that is not a good fit. That doesn't match the shape of the hand. I mean, your hand gets bigger as you approach the base of the thumb. And I think you need to account for that in mittens that are going to fit well. So when I'm looking for mitten patterns, I will now only consider, unless the colorwork pattern is just too cute to ignore, I will only consider patterns that have a gusset where you're increasing every so often. I think in this pattern, it's like every other round, you're adding stitches on either side of the gusset, because that just, like, look, it just matches the shape of the hand. So you can see how big this is on me, but it should fit him pretty well. And even if it's big on him, he could wear gloves inside to make them extra warm. Anyway, I just wanted to say that about mittens because, the waste yarn thing is probably easier, requires less charting, but like, it's important that mittens fit really well. The last pair of mittens that I made with the afterthought thumb, like, they're totally straining and there's a big hole that I need to fix and haven't done that yet. But anyway, I just bought this yarn. I had other yarn picked out and then I asked him what colors he would like and he said blue, and I didn't have blue yarn in the right weight. So I happened to meet a friend at a local yarn shop, the Sow's Ear, which I've talked about before. It's yarn and a cafe. So like, if you want to browse the yarn, but you don't want to buy any, and you can just like get yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and like look at all their nice offerings, and you've still supported the business without blowing up your stash. Or if you're there with somebody who's not into the crafty stuff, but wants to spend time with you, like they can get something to eat or something to drink and just enjoy themselves. It's just, and they're lovely and welcoming, and I just can't say enough good things about them. Anyway, I met a friend there a couple weekends ago, which was lovely. And I saw that they had this new yarn that's called Harmony DK from Yarn Citizen. I don't know anything about this company, but here's the label. I think some of this is like reclaimed or recycled or something. The label doesn't say, but there was a note on their sign in the shop. But it is 50% wool, 50% alpaca. DK weight, 230 yards for 100 grams. So I have the color Limestone, which is this nice kind of warm gray, and Deep Sea, which is, of course, navy blue. And I really, really like how they look together. So that's the outer layer, brand new yarn. What I plan to use for the lining is, this is almost the same blue. Okay, navy blue, long discontinued Fresco yarn, which is wool, alpaca, angora. There's the label for that. This is from Classic Elite, which went out of business years ago. I've had this yarn for ages. If you're a longtime viewer, you may remember that I made a pair of mittens for my son like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I remember he was learning to drive when I made them. Anyway, I used Fresco for them. They were so soft and warm and beautiful, and they pilled immediately. Like, they look terrible. They're in terrible shape. So you may wonder why I am using this again for mittens. Well, it's because it's for the liner. It's going to be on the inside of the mitten where you can't see. Even if there's friction and they pill in there, it won't show on the outside. I think most of the friction from mittens actually comes from the outside, you know, when you're like gripping a steering wheel or gripping a snow shovel or, you know, lifting up a book bag or whatever it is you're doing with your mittens on. So I think it's going to be okay. But I like having, you know, I like using this yarn from deep in my stash. It's super soft and I know that it won't bother his skin. My son seems to have the most sensitive skin of all of us. Like, he can wear wool, but I just have to be careful that I'm not picking anything too like rustic or rough. So yeah, that's how it's going to be. The pattern actually calls for lace weight yarn to use in the lining. This is not lace weight. This is more like fingering weight, but I think that will just go to making it even warmer. Whew. Okay, maybe what I'll do is go grab the other pair of Midlothian mittens that I haven't yet finished and show those to you. Okay, I went and dug up the other pair of Midlothian mittens that I started years ago, that I have never worn because I didn't have them finished. You can see the waist yarn hanging out the bottom. By way of size comparison, these are for my son, these are for me. I think one of my hang-ups with not making a lining is that these already are snug enough on my hand that I think a lining might make them tight. I don't know, if I found lace weight yarn, like I can't imagine that a lace weight lining would really add significant volume. I could even, you know what, I could even do like a mohair silk. I might do that. Because I need another pair of mittens. Mine are getting pretty worn out. I used some kind of Rowan alpaca yarn. I don't remember what it was called, but it was on clearance at the Wisconsin Craft Market, which went out of business years ago. I think I found it on clearance and lugged these two colors together and got a skein of each. It's a single ply, it's 100% alpaca. It is buttery soft. It is really nice. Sometimes alpaca is itchy to me and sometimes it's not. It's fine on my hands. So I knew that wouldn't be an issue. You know, because it's single ply and baby alpaca or whatever, I don't know how well it will wear, but it is very, very warm. So I need to finish these because I've got this pair of mittens and they even match my coat. Not that that usually matters to me. So anyway, one of my oldest works in progress, maybe my oldest one really, unless there's probably something older deep in the bowels of my craft space, but we're not going to talk about that now. Okay, I want to mention quickly reading. I talked about a couple of books last time that I just decided not to finish. 1984, I know I should read it, and it's important and significant, and somehow I got through high school without ever reading it, blah, blah, blah. I just kind of couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. It will still be in the library at some future time, hopefully. So I'll read it later. There was also that book about deconstructing faith by Carla Comstra. I just kind of lost interest. I have a feeling that that book would be really impactful and meaningful for somebody who was like at that moment of deciding if they need to leave their church or deconstruct what organized religion has meant to them. I'm not in that place right now, and it just, I don't know, it just wasn't doing it for me. I follow her on Instagram. I really like her content, and I think she's a very, I really like the kinds of things she has to say. I just wasn't in a place to read a whole book at that time. But I have been on a real kick of reading stuff by the author Kazuo Ishiguro, and I wanted to share a couple of things by him. So I had finished Remains of the Day, I think, at the last episode. Since then, I have a friend who really likes this author, and he lent me a couple of books, which is really nice of him. Since then, I've read this called A Pale View of Hills, which was written in 1982. This is his first novel. And one aspect of his biography I got a little bit wrong. The author, Ishiguro, was born in Japan and left when he was only 5 years old. I thought that he had grown up there, but he in fact was pretty young when he left. I think his father got a job in England and they never thought they would stay permanently, but then they did. So he's like Japanese British, but culturally I think more British than Japanese. In any case, this book takes place in both Japan and Britain. It's really quite haunting. It's hard to say that there's much of a plot. It's more of a character study. And I don't want to reveal too much about what it's about, but it really, really drew me in. There is so much. It takes place like right after World War II, when Japan was rebuilding, and there were all these people who were obviously quite affected and traumatized by what they had been through. But it was also like right after the Japanese Empire fell. I mean, I didn't realize this until pretty recently, but Japan had colonized a huge part of Asia. Like, it was way more extensive than I initially realized. As a musician, I have over the last few years been doing a lot of Korean repertoire with a couple of singers. I'm going off on a tangent here, so just bear with me. But a lot of the music that we perform was written either during Japanese occupation, Japan occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945, or soon after. So, you know, Korea had decades of occupation, and then they had the Korean War not too long after that. So there was just a lot of hardship and difficulty that was reflected in the music of that time. So I knew a little bit about that, but having this novel coming from the perspective of people living in Japan not too long after that was really interesting as well. And then some of it takes place later in England also. But the plot won't keep you on your toes, but it is just the way it's written is so beautiful and engaging. And there's kind of a lot of, like the way the dialogue works, there's a lot of formality and people will sort of repeat things a lot. Like, that's just sort of the nature of the way people would interact at that time. It's just really, really good. So I just started, and I can't even tell you what this is about yet because I literally just started this last night. Never Let Me Go, which I think is one of his more popular works. Takes place, pretty sure takes place entirely, oh wait, yeah, England. At least the first part takes place in England. When was this written? 2005. So he was well into his career by the time he wrote this and had already won the Nobel Prize and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I might tell you more about it next time. However, that's all I have for you today. I've got other things to do. I hope to post at least one more time before the holiday madness sets in, but I will see you next time. Bye-bye.